Have you ever stopped to wonder if your choices are really your own? It's a huge question, one that people have been wrestling with for centuries. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful and honestly challenging arguments ever made against free will, coming straight from the 16th century reformer John Calvin.
I mean, think about it. That last big decision you made, did you feel totally in control? Or, if you're honest, were there other things at play? Your upbringing, your hidden desires, maybe even your biology, all kind of nudging you one way or another. This is the very heart of the puzzle we're going to unpack in this explainer.
Now, Calvin's view is famously tough. He argues that humanity, left to its own devices, is basically trapped by its own sinful nature. But here's the thing. Calvin doesn't just throw this out there as an opinion. He builds this incredibly tight, logical case, and he anticipates all the big common-sense objections, and then he dismantles them one by one. And that's exactly how we're going to walk through his argument.
So, let's get right to the first major hurdle. Calvin introduces this idea that at first sounds like a complete contradiction. He says our sin is both necessary and voluntary. How on earth can both of those things be true at the same time?
This is the first thing that jumps out, right? It just feels like a logical trap. If we're forced to do something, how can we be blamed for it? And if we do it willingly, well then surely we could have just not done it. So how does Calvin get around this?
Calvin's answer here is actually a really clever pivot. He says the objection is looking in the wrong place. Our inability to choose good isn't some design flaw from the get-go. He calls it a corruption, like a self-inflicted wound on human nature. So for Calvin, the very fact that we must sin is the ultimate proof of our guilt, not an excuse to get us off the hook.
And this brings us right to his core concept, voluntary necessity. Calvin makes a huge distinction here. He says voluntary and free are not the same thing. In our corrupted state, our will actively wants to sin. We are bound by our nature, yeah, but we follow it willingly. It's a chilling idea, really. In his view, we are slaves who love our chains.
You know, Calvin actually borrows this line from an earlier theologian, Bernard of Clairvaux, and it just perfectly captures the tragic weight of his argument. The misery isn't just that we're trapped, it's that we are willing participants in our own captivity.
Okay, but if our sin is necessary, even a voluntary kind of necessary, that opens up a whole other can of worms. What does that do to our concept of justice? This brings us to the next big challenge to Calvin's whole argument, the system of rewards and punishments.
And this is a huge one, right? It still resonates today. Our entire legal and moral framework seems to be built on the idea that people are accountable for their free choices. You take that freedom away, and it feels like the whole idea of justice just falls apart. So how does Calvin's system account for it?
Calvin's answer here is split in two. On the one hand, when it comes to punishment, he says because we sin voluntarily, because it comes from our own corrupted desires, we are justly punished for it. But when it comes to righteousness, he completely flips the script. Good deeds, he says, aren't our achievements that earn a reward. They are, in his view, unmerited gifts from God.
For this idea, Calvin leans really heavily on his hero, Augustine, and this quote just nails it. When God rewards a good deed, he isn't paying back a debt he owes us, he's basically celebrating a gift that he gave in the first place.
This right here shows the radical reversal at the heart of Calvin's thinking. We're so used to thinking, I do good stuff, so I get rewarded. But for Calvin, the flow is the exact opposite. God gives grace, that grace produces a good action, and then God chooses to crown that action as if it were our own. The whole cause and effect is turned on its head.
All right, so this leads us to the third and maybe the most baffling challenge of all. If we are genuinely powerless to do good on our own, then what's the point of having moral laws or divine commands in the first place?
It feels kind of absurd, doesn't it? Why would God command things like be holy or love your neighbor if he knows we are fundamentally incapable of doing it on our own steam? It really does feel like being told to fly without being given wings.
Well, Calvin's answer here forces us to rethink the whole purpose of law. He says it's not a simple to-do list that we're supposed to check off. No, instead, the law is this perfect standard, and it's placed far above us on purpose, specifically to show us just how far we fall short. It's more of a diagnostic tool than an instruction manual.
And this tool, he says, works in a few different ways. First, for the unbeliever, the law acts like a mirror. It just reflects their own guilt and leaves them with no excuses.
Then, for the believer, it does two things. It constantly reminds them of their own weakness, pushing them to rely on God for help. And finally, through that divine help, the law becomes a target that actually inspires a real desire to do good.
And once again, it's Augustine who provides the perfect, concise summary. The commands aren't a test of our strength, they're a map to our need. They show us what goodness looks like, so we'll stop trying to find it in ourselves and instead seek it from the only one who has it.
So after taking on these three massive, common-sense objections, where does Calvin's argument actually leave us? Well, it leaves us with this fundamental reorientation, a total shift in perspective away from what humans can do and towards something else entirely. And this is the ultimate takeaway. The entire debate about free will, in Calvin's mind, just starts in the wrong place. By asking, am I free, or what can I achieve, we've already missed the point. He insists the only proper starting point is to ask, what is God like, and what does he give? Everything else flows from that.
And this is his unflinching conclusion, in his own very powerful words. It's a pretty bleak diagnosis of the human condition when left to its own devices. For Calvin, any good that we see in the world is not the product of human freedom, but a direct, gracious intervention from God into a fallen system.
And that leaves us with a final, really challenging thought to chew on. In a world that is all about self-made success and personal achievement, what does it mean if our very best actions aren't really ours at all? If goodness is something you receive rather than something you accomplish, it forces us to rethink everything about pride, about virtue, and what it actually means to be a good person.